Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Casey Seiler, editor-in-chief of the Times-Union, in for Dan Clark. The June 28th primary election set the ballot for New York's governor's race, but voter turnout was low. What does that low level of participation say about the health of our democracy? And are the investments New York has made in providing early access to the polls worth it when voters don't show up? New York Now partnered with the Times-Union's Brendan Lyons, managing editor for investigations and Capitol Bureau chief, to examine the effectiveness of early voting in New York. Take a look.
Since 2019, New Yorkers have had the option to vote early in elections. Early voting was intended to increase voter turnout and improve access to the polls. But there were more ballots cast in early voting last year, even though there were no statewide races.
Early voting is new. So the first time we had early voting was November of 2019. And then the pandemic crisis hit us. There were major shifts in how people voted during the pandemic. That during the 2020 primaries, the percentage of people casting votes by absentee ballot skyrocketed. And so did the turnout for early voting. So we're still in a phase where we don't have a lot of historical data in New York in order to predict, what is a good early voting turnout and what is a poor turnout. The biggest problems with early voting are making sure that sites are fairly distributed.
It really is essential that that site is located in a central location that is easy to access for, everyone.
New York's early voting legislation requires polls to be open for 9 days, with at least one early voting location for every 50,000 registered voters in a county. Early voting sites must be open with a minimum number of hours set by the state, depending on whether it's a weekday or weekend. Counties pay for the poll workers and in some cases need to rent polling sites. Implementing the rules has presented challenges for many counties.
The counties are getting much better, but the legislature still had to step in to make additional rules this year because a couple of counties were egregiously violating the spirit of the early voting statute. The counties that have the largest number of early voting sites also tend to have the higher early voting turnout. So the convenience of early voting sites does appear to be a significant factor in whether people are going to use early voting. And of course, the whole purpose of early voting is to make it more convenient for the voter. So the voter is not locked into having to go on the day designated for elections.
It's the end of the school year, there's graduations, moves ups, so parents are maybe still busy. I don't know how long this early voting goes for, but I hope that people do take advantage of it. I think it's great.
I was going to say thank God, but that's my speech, that we have early voting before the time of the primary voting come in. Everybody need to come down here and vote early. Get it over with. Get it done.
Across the state, roughly 14% of the voters in the June 28th primary had cast their ballots using early voting polling sites. That's according to unofficial numbers from the State Board of Elections. For SMITKA, it's not about numbers, but access.
Any vote cast during the early voting time period makes early voting worth it. And any additional time that we can provide people to, again, get that access to the polls who might not otherwise have been able to get there makes the process worth it and ensures that we have a democracy in which every single person has the ability to participate.
A review of the cost associated with keeping polling sites open for more than a week shows a variation in the price per vote. Fulton County was $33, Rensselaer County $13, Saratoga County $19, and Albany County came in at $65 per vote. In Cortland County, the cost per vote was $1,500 for the few hundred voters who took advantage of early voting. Ed McDonough, the Democratic Elections Commissioner in Rensselaer County, said it isn't worth it. He said it's difficult to find people willing to staff polling sites for 9 days, and as he put it, wait for nobody to come in.
A cost between $10 and $25 per voter for conducting the live election is reasonable. But when you start to get costs that work out above $25 per voter, then I think it's appropriate to take a hard look and say, well, is this really cost effective? Elections do have a cost that goes with them, and sometimes you just have to swallow hard and bear that cost.
Figuring out the cost equation is critical, and it's hard to draw general conclusions about the cost of early voting and how they balance with New Yorkers' right to access the ballot box.
If early voting goes away, it will disproportionately affect those who historically have had the most difficulty getting to the polls on Election Day. So that's people who do shift work, people who use public transportation, people who might have mobility impairments that make it difficult for them to get to the polls. They might need to arrange a ride. People who might not have childcare set up within those voting hours on Election Day. Really, anybody who doesn't necessarily have a flexible schedule, it can be hard to get to the polls on one single day.
For smaller turnout elections, like primary elections or special elections, maybe 9 days of early voting is overkill. The county boards of elections, as they gain experience, should also adjust their staffing according to the anticipated turnout. The idea is to run it like a business. So if you go to the local hamburger joint, they may be open from 6 a.m. until 9 p.m., but they don't have the same staffing all day long. They will increase the staffing for the times that they expect it to be busier. And I would urge the county election officials to look at that model and try to adjust their staffing accordingly.
Erica Smitka with the League of Women Voters said no matter how you choose to vote, early voting, vote by mail, or casting a ballot on Election Day, the important thing is to turn out for all elections.
I hope that for some, if you do see that voter turnout is low and you didn't make it to the polls that year, I hope it's a bit of a wake-up call, because it really is those local elections where people have the most impact on what happens in their day-to-day lives. Your vote for your city council person is going to have a much greater impact on your day-to-day life than perhaps your vote on a larger national scale. So I want people to remember how important it is to show up for those local elections, to let their voice be heard, and to use early voting as a way to do that.